today we're going to talk about sign-in and, more importantly, DocMDP and, well, the ways you can break your PDF without even knowing it. You might do everything according to the specification, and yet your PDF will be broken. So, let's start with, well, how it can happen. Today we are going to discuss 3 cases. I'm going to present the first one, and you're then going to present other 2. So how does it work? As you know, PDF specification can be in some cases not precise enough to describe all the possible cases, all the possible things you can break. And in such examples, you have basically 2 options. To either follow your gut and do things how you think they should work, or follow popular and common viewers and other tools. And in some cases, this can lead to pretty weird behavior, especially when your customer addresses these things by saying that, well, my PDF doesn't really valid according to the Adobe, and you have to say that either you have to prove that it's valid, but, well, in many such cases, customer won't really care about technical stuff you will be sharing, and the main point from his perspective would be that Adobe says it's invalid. Well, what are you trying to prove here? Or you have to change your code to be compliant with Adobe, even though you might understand specification differently. Okay, let's probably move on. So, case 1, and this case addresses DocMDP. Maybe a brief introduction of what DocMDP is. When you sign your document, one of the important things you should and can specify in the signature is how this document is supposed to be changed or can be changed in the future. And there are basically, well, okay, let's get back to this a little bit later. But yeah, the main idea of DocMDP is to forbid certain changes to your signed document. And in this particular example, we are going to talk about DocMDP and ways you can break it without knowing it. So, imagine a case when you signed your document with a signature which has DocMDP, which basically allows you to introduce signatures, form fields, change annotations. You still cannot modify page content, but you are allowed to modify annotations and introduce new ones. And let's say that later, after the document is signed, you decided that you actually want to follow some standard which requires the document to contain timestamp signature on top of already existing one. And let's also say that this document is tagged. So you have structured tree root, and yeah, your signature is tagged. So what happens next? You add a timestamp, and according to the specification, it's pretty much allowed to add a timestamp. This timestamp is visual, so you can see it on the page. Then it should also be tagged, of course. But suddenly, after everything is correctly signed and your document follows the requirements for DocMDP, well, some viewers can say that it's no longer valid and that you introduce changes which are not allowed. Why does this happen? Well, first of all, in order to figure out why this happens, you need to, of course, dive into the changes you do and basically try to remove them one by one, just to see what is causing the issue. In this particular example, most likely, a viewer can mark your document as invalid because of the changes you do in structure root. And let's take a look at the specification here. So here you can see in this table possible levels of DocMDP field, and we have 1, 2, and 3, and each level describes what changes can be done to your document. So first one says that no changes to the document shall be permitted. Any change to the document shall invalidate the signature. Second one permits changes in forms, but not annotations. So you can perform sign-in. You can instantiate page templates, and basically that's it, and fill in forms, of course. And the third one is built on top of the second one, and it also allows you to add the annotations, delete annotations, modify them in any way you want. So that's pretty much it. That's all the specification says about these cases. But let's be realistic here. So first case, no changes to document shall be permitted. That's already pretty much impossible because, first of all, if you introduce new incremental update to your document, you have to introduce some changes, right? So you need to do changes in the trailer for info dictionary. You usually need to update catalog in some way. You also, of course, just plainly update the document by inserting new xref table and other stuff. And it's also probably important to mention that actually all these requirements are not relevant in case of these DSS dictionary updates and timestamping. So this was the fact that you might need to increase or rather improve the level of your signature was taken into account, and you can and should be able to update DSS dictionary and introduce timestamps. But unfortunately already here there are some questions regarding the specification. So no changes to the document shall be permitted rather means that you can introduce changes pretty much, but you shouldn't do anything you don't have to. For the second one, it's again pretty much the same. So when you fill out forms, you still need to introduce incremental update, you still need to do some changes in your document. And with the third one, it's the one which probably the most questionable one here, because it plainly says that you can do whatever you want with the annotations, but as I already mentioned, in case of, for example, in case of tag document, you can just add an annotation without modifying structure tree root, right? Because otherwise your PDF document will no longer be, tagged according to the requirements. So it's not mentioned here, and it's not even clear how to treat it, because if some viewer just decided to follow the spec directly and says that you should not update, you cannot update structure tree root, you can't really argue with that because that's what spec says. However, at the same time, if you do that, you can also argue that, it doesn't make sense to not allow to update tag tree because otherwise your document will be no longer valid according to UA or UA standards. So in this particular example, our document indeed had a signature and indeed was tagged, and new timestamp was added on top of the signature. Of course, structure root was updated, and viewer just complains that the document is not, or rather first signature is no longer valid because there were some unallowed changes in the document. What can you do about it? Well, as a SDK developer or as a user. First of all, you can just not perform any changes in the structure root. Yes, it's problematic and questionable because, again, your signature, your timestamp signature, which is present on the page, will no longer be visible. It's also possible to not make it visible at all, and then structure tree won't be updated. Additionally, you need to take into account the fact that you need to take into account the fact that this timestamp signature shall remain in the scope of the incremental update and not try to introduce it in the original version of the document. I guess that's your only option, unless you want to, again, argue with the customer about the fact that the document is in fact valid. And this brings me to the main point of this first or maybe even whole presentation. What should you do as a SDK developer? you have specification, you follow the specification, and yet you have compliance that your document is not valid. That's an open question. What can you do about it? Because, well, there are obviously some big viewers in the field which kind of dictate their rules. And yeah, you don't have much choice rather than to try to follow them unless it's clearly some incorrect behavior, in which case you can probably report it as a bug, but good luck with that. So yes, you have to adapt. You have to change the behavior of your SDK or your other tool in order to be in compliance with big viewers in the field. And yes, in some cases it will require you to actually reverse engineer the solutions to actually understand how they work. It's not really only relevant for DocMDP, it's just this case shows the problem with DocMDP, but same things will happen with form fields. I don't know, tagging pretty much also affected here. It's just a common practice in PDF world when you have to sometimes don't follow the specification precisely and instead introduce some, well, safeguards not to break anything. Well, the next slide pretty much shows exactly what I, or rather talks about what I just said, that SDKs need to provide pretty much some guardrails against these possible violations. Okay, let's move on to case 2. And case 2 is related to FieldMDP, which sounds quite a lot like DocMDP, and it's actually the main idea of FieldMDP is quite similar to DocMDP. DocMDP mostly, well, first of all, DocMDP can be set only once for the very first signature in a document. However, FieldMDP is allowed to be present in any sequential signature. And FieldMDP doesn't really says what content in this document can or cannot be updated. It only focuses on form fields. And basically there are 3 values in FieldMDP. It can be, sorry, it can be all, not sure. It can be all, none, or specific fields, which are either locked or not locked. And in this particular example, PDF was signed with login set to all. Then the next signature was introduced, which contained as well FieldMDP and was signed with value none. And the result that the first signature is invalid, even though, well, nothing was changed actually. Here we can have the specification, and as you can see in the table 256, possible values, which I already mentioned, all, include and exclude. Well, when I was saying none, it basically meant that this action field had a value of include and field array was empty. And yeah, this is how you can actually specify those values. So if you want to exclude or include some specific fields, you just pick the right value and provide the fields you want to exclude or include. And yeah, the main problem with this part and with this part of the specification is that, once again, FieldMDP is quite vague about how those fields shall be treated. So when you have a signature with all being set as an action of FieldMDP dictionary, does it mean that all fields in the document, no matter if they're already there or not, shall be locked? Or does it indicate that only the fields which are already there shall be locked? Or, well, how does it work? And the point here is that, well, no one is right or wrong here, right? You can understand this basically anyhow. Okay, I guess that's it. And now I'm going to give presentation back to Julian.
Yep, thank you. In this case, to basically dive into some details, what our client was facing. Once again, to quickly go over what Eugene has introduced, they had a PDF file with multiple fields in it, and they had this workflow where they were applying several subsequent signatures. I think it's important here that those PDF signatures in the document are essentially also form fields. That's just how it's built in the or defined in the PDF specification. Here it's important that they were adding new signatures when they wanted to, new fields when they wanted to sign it. At first it all worked fine, up until they have introduced the field lock mechanism. What they wanted to have is that after the first signature is introduced to the document, those form fields that existed in the file, basically like input fields or some kind of checkboxes, imagine some random report or form that you need to fill in. When they did, and to do that, they have assigned a lock dictionary to the first signature, and they have specified the locking property to lock all signatures. Because they wanted all of the signatures in the file that were existent at the moment to be locked. However, they also expected that when they would introduce a new signature field and sign it, it would still all work fine. Here, they basically tried to do that, and here is what they ended up with. If we look at some viewers that we all know and love, you would see that the first signature was considered invalid. So if you have a look at over here, the first signature is marked with red. I'm not sure if it's that easy to see, but it is. Same here, the first signature is invalid. If you try to validate this document in some other high-level validation tools, maybe found online, you can even get a pretty report, quite detailed, and it already helps to understand what's going wrong here. It actually indeed talks, over here, the FieldMDP constraint was violated. All the tools kind of agree that the signature that was created is cryptographically valid, but those modifications analysis gave unexpected results to the customer. If we try to interpret what we see, and basically, with all the tools that we have tried validating this document, we see there is a consensus that signatures lock dictionary, when it's set to all, it also actually affects the signatures, the fields that would be added to the document afterwards. It kind of makes sense, but it's a bit hard to guess from the specification how exactly this value needs to be treated, and similar like in the first case, you have to find this consensus across all the sometimes when you work with signatures, especially with those updates, you would see that you wouldn't always know for sure what exactly caused the problem. Again, what Eugene already mentioned, that sometimes it would require quite low-level, careful, step-by-step analysis what changes exactly affect the validation result for prior signatures after the update. In this particular case, it was indeed about the FieldMDP. So you could indeed see that, first of all, initially when they have introduced this new property, something went wrong, and the analysis that I have described proved that. Again, what this means for the particular solution developer, when you want to introduce some kind of workflow related to subsequent signatures in your document, you actually not only have to implement the solution, you probably need to be quite careful by testing your output documents across all the PDF viewers and validators this document might be checked against, just to make sure that there is a consensus, that you yourself understand how it works, and you cannot only rely on the PDF specification when it comes to those updates, allowed updates. And also, if you find yourself a developer of the library, let's say, that allows you to create the signatures, you're actually then need to think through upfront all possible scenarios that the users would want to use those different properties. And again, for all of those cases, check how it will work across different tools. So here it's actually good that there is a consensus, and I think in most basic scenarios there would be a consensus, but you have to figure it out by reverse engineering. And on to the third case, the final one for today. In this particular scenario, there is no misunderstanding in terms of what is proper document structure, what is compliant and what is not. But some tools confirm the signed document as valid and unmodified as a whole. And in some other cases, you can get this warning, basically, that there are some changes outside of the signature scope. We will talk how the allowed changes can lead to inconsistent validation results, basically. Once again, a very specific user scenario. They implement a validation solution this time. They don't create signatures, they validate them. They want to validate specifically PADES BLT documents. PADES is a standard for signatures, and there are several layers to it. BLT is, well, it basically means that next to the usual digital signature, as we understand it, that provides you like cryptographical protection, that based on which you can check the integrity, authenticity, non-repudiation, and so on. But next to that usual signature object, you also need to embed some information that would be useful for validation in the future. And there are like some specific things that you need to cover. We will talk about that a bit later once again. But all right, the customer tried to do that. They took a library, they implemented the logic, they get a signed document and start testing what they have. And there is some mismatch that you can see here. So some viewers, some high-level validator tools would say that everything is good. They would sometimes even mention that document is not modified after signing. But in their solution, they see that while cryptographically signature is solid, there is this flag that I mentioned before, that the signature doesn't cover the whole document. They interpreted that as kind of a reason or a mark that the signature, that something goes wrong, the signature is not in fact valid, and yeah, this created quite some confusion. To understand what's going on, again, we need to have a look at a bit more lower level how the document is built. So here you can see that the document actually contains multiple incremental updates. You can see that there is end of file marker, which is not at the end of the file. For the simplicity's sake, let's assume there are two revisions to this document. The signature was introduced in the first revision, and as soon as you do that, based on how the signatures work, you cannot edit that part anymore, because otherwise you will break the signature. We talk about updates to the signed documents a lot today, and whenever you do that, you actually need to introduce a new revision to the document. And that's what was happening in this particular scenario. So how the customer's logic worked. They were checking the signature for integrity and authenticity. Integrity basically means that the data that the signature signed was indeed confirmed as intact. Authenticity means that the certificate that is presented with the signature is indeed the one that was used to sign the document. It's not some random certificate. They indeed trusted this certificate, so normally you would also want to establish whether the certificate could have been revoked by the time the signature was created. Do you really trust the certificate authority? But this all checked out, everything was fine. However, again, they were seeing that the signature doesn't cover the whole document. Well, as we've discussed, there are new revisions to this document. The signature was introduced before the new revisions, and kind of by definition, the signature could not have indeed covered those new revisions, well, because those new revisions weren't, well, they didn't exist at the moment when the signature was introduced to the document. So technically, the verdict that the customer got was not wrong. The signature doesn't cover the whole document. There were indeed modifications, and those new revisions cannot be blindly trusted based on the given signature field validation only. However, if we kind of learn a little bit more about how the signatures are structured in the document, you can learn that in the specification there is actually a allowed set of changes. We've discussed today about some scenarios when about such changes. More specifically, PADES BLT level is normally achieved by such allowed modifications. So if we look into the internals of that update, we would see that the original document was of version 1.3. After the signing, it was upgraded to version 1.7. This is not particularly relevant to anything, but that's just an observation we saw. A DSS dictionary was added, and timestamp dictionary was added. What those are, well, I've mentioned that the LT level for PADES signatures requires you to add some additional information. So in the DSS dictionary, in the PDF file, you can actually store different data entities that would be required. So think about certificates, think about revocation data that you get from the certificate authority that at a certain moment of time the signature is not revoked. I mean, the certificate is not revoked. And the timestamp dictionary, it's essentially yet another signature in practice. Like it looks like a digital signature. However, it's created by some third-party service that kind of proves, well, it gives you a proof of existence. If you have a look at the well, it basically says that at a certain moment of time, that content has already existed. So this is useful during the validation in the future. So you don't need necessarily to check everything at the current moment of time. You know that in the past, this content that you look at definitely existed. So yeah, I've described those two entities, DSS dictionary, timestamp dictionary. However, this is similar to the first case. Again, those things are always allowed to be added as an update to the PDF document, even after the document, after the signature is signed. But it's practically defined in those words. Like you can interpret it as you need to do the minimal set of changes to introduce those entities. However, this is not what you would actually often do. For example, modification date of the document. You would probably want to update it. In this particular example that I've described, version of the PDF file was updated, which can be also needed because I think timestamp dictionaries, DSS, was introduced in 1.7 only. And as we worked with this example, viewers agreed that this is fine. It's allowed to update such thing. It's quite reasonable to mark the producer of the new revision of the document. So when you update the metadata and you say that this new revision was added by a certain tool. So again, those changes pretty reasonable. There is apparently consensus across validation tools that those are also allowed things to be introduced in the document. It's not explicitly stated in the specification. However, all in all, the high-level validator tools, the PDF viewers, their verdict was also not wrong because such modifications are indeed allowed. So yeah, in this particular case, it's not about how cryptographically the signature is valid or not. In this case, however, it is still not enough to perform full document validation. We can also notice that when it comes to this implementation of validation of the document as a whole, those allowed changes are not necessarily emphasized much. So you can even see, like in the beginning, that the document was not modified, even though technically it was. It makes sense to me on one hand, because you don't want to overcomplicate things. It's a bit hard to say that, hey, document was in fact modified, but don't worry, this is allowed changes. It's a bit hard to communicate. If you have checked that those changes are allowed and the specification states that that kind of changes are allowed to be skipped, it's kind of maybe even expected to just mark the signature as valid without too much emphasis on those technical details. However, at the same time, it is kind of important to mention that there were some changes, because in that case, when this happens, you actually have to trust the PDF processor judgment and its interpretation of the PDF specification, that nothing else was affected in the original document. And as we've discussed today on, well, talking about multiple examples, this judgment is not based on some strictly defined procedure. And this comparison of revisions, essentially, between the documents, between the versions of the document, is far from trivial logic, in fact. And yeah, you need to find this overall consensus that is established across different tools. In conclusion, we hope these several cases to be a practical lesson for PDF processor developers. We wanted to highlight possible misalignment in the interpretation of the validation procedure. And yeah, some food for thought. What can be improved here? I think maybe the ideal case scenario, I don't believe that much that kind of procedure can be defined in the specification completely in a strict way. Like I've said, this is a non-trivial operation. However, maybe what could help and what would be a little bit more practical solution and maybe the best outcome for me, if we could have a corpus of example documents that would establish agreed upon consensus which documents updates are valid, which are not. What could also, I think, help is to also find some common guidelines, and that maybe could be also part of the specification, if you allow me to freely brainstorm such things. Basically, some guidelines how the viewers, how the PDF processors should communicate that the digital signature's validity. What is the status of digital signature validity in the presence of allowed changes on top of the signature of the signed content? And yeah, finally, I think at least we should try to educate the end users of the PDF technology and also the technical community. And yeah, we hope that this presentation contributed to that last point. Yeah, basically that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Do we have questions?
Excellent presentation, guys. Just to give you some backstory. So there are two reasons why what you want has not yet happened and probably will not happen, which isn't to say it's not a great idea, but it's just worth noting for relative purposes. So one is that every time this topic comes up, there are two things that, and this topic and request has come up, I can think of at least half a dozen times or more, just in here, also at ISO, and for that matter, even at ETSI itself. So we as an industry are well aware of the fact that it's an issue, but the reason it doesn't get solved is one, no one actually ever volunteers to step up to write those guidelines or do those sample files. So if you guys can convince your management to do that, or we can go lock Raf in a room until he agrees, that's fine. That would be great. That's one. The other is that many members in the industry believe that signature validation actually has business rule requirements and that standardization would actually be problematic to their business. So just worth noting. But again, yes, we all agree it's important, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can imagine also that prescribing very specific requirements to validation can be even not entirely helpful for the whole scenario, because as soon as you define or show your implementation, you kind of invite to break it. So I also understand that it's hard to make this first step, I suppose, because there would be some time of turmoil when some clever people will come up with ways to basically work around your procedure, and it would take some time to establish this. So yeah, I imagine that maybe practically everyone who tried to implement this started thinking about this. So indeed, yeah, thank you for your comment.
Hi, this is Julian. I have a question about, you seem to think that incremental save on a signed document should generally be considered okay. But this is exactly how the $1 trillion refund from Amazon was created, right? Which was a proof of concept of a hack of a signed document. The document is perfectly valid and says it's signed, but it's actually a refund for $1 trillion from Amazon.de, which of course makes no sense. And it was done by adding an incremental update to the document. What's your feeling on that? You seem to suggest that was okay, but...
Well, that's the reality we kind of have to deal with right now, because that's how the signatures are defined, that if you want to have multiple signatures in the document, you need to apply them in the form of those incremental updates. If I would start brainstorming, it might be a good idea to put digital signatures outside of the usual incremental updates. This would introduce, it would limit the flexibility, but when it comes to digital signatures, maybe it would be a healthy idea to make those things more strict, so that this validation procedure would be straightforward, as opposed to having to compare arbitrarily incremental updates. So yeah, I definitely share, well, I'm not sure what's your stance on that, but when it comes to incremental updates outside of the signatures, this is what the third case is basically about. You step outside of the cryptographical protection, and instead you start to rely on some other things which might not be the best idea.
Right, but shouldn't you at least get some kind of warning to say, okay, the first iteration of the document, that's valid and signed and everything's good, but there have been changes made in an incremental save? Leonard, I think you'd agree, right?
Well, again, that's this. But to your point, I'm not saying you're wrong, but this is the whole issue of why none of this is standardized, because first off, in some ways that mandates a specific implementation of every product, a specific user experience in every product, which we very specifically choose not to do. So again, it's not that you're wrong, Julian, and you'll find that most products do exactly what you suggest, but to standardize it is much more problematic. But having stuff in an incremental update after a signature is by design. I mean, that's how signatures were designed from the beginning. It has to work that way. But I agree with you that what is in that incremental section is where it becomes exactly what you guys spent the last 30 minutes talking to us about, is that's where it becomes significant, is what's in that incremental section, not that there is one.
Yeah, I would also say that it's practically impossible to have a valid signed document without an incremental update in the long run, because pretty much in order to create a long-term document which can be validated in the long term, you need this document to include revocation data, timestamp, another timestamp in some time, and etc. And all of these operations pretty much require incremental updates. And indeed, it all boils down to how you perform the validation and what you allow in those incremental update. And yeah, that's why pretty much we were talking the whole presentation about how this should be somehow more standardized, because at the moment you can actually try it yourself. If you get some signed document and you add an incremental update to it, and if within this incremental update your catalog dictionary will suddenly start containing one additional entry, I don't know, with key, random key, and value, random value, this document will be completely valid according to most of the viewers, which is like bizarre. You can add any information you want in the document. Of course, it won't be seen on the page, but it will be inside the document. So it's just, my understanding is that this happens because, those requirements, those rules, what can actually be done with the document in those incremental updates is not described precisely.
Yeah, I would definitely vouch for maybe, like you said, when this happens, maybe it makes sense to emphasize it a little bit more. From what I know, that the digital signature it's not only digital signature, there were some allowed changes on top of it. From what I've seen, I think viewers do suggest you to open the like previous revisions of the document to view the original document. I mean, the original state of the document that was actually signed. So they do communicate that in a way, but maybe there could be a little bit more standardized approach to this, even though I can imagine that it's really hard to find a common approach here. And I think PDF specification normally tries to stay away from prescribing how the UI should work and so on. So this is a little bit of a gray area, I suppose.
All right, I'm afraid we have to stop the session, but thank you guys again. Big applause.
Thank you, everyone.